Management Pack Builder supports creating events for vRealize operations as well as objects and metrics. So here we're going to go through and define everything for our specific events. The first thing we need to have is a request that returns all of the event information, so we can add that now. Here we have our previous requests. We can add our event requests here. Here we can see our event response, and we can see some of the formatting of this. It's important to understand where your events exist and the path to them, because you'll need that in the next step. So when we move back over to events, we're going to add an event, and here we need to specify the request where those events are returned from. You can see we see our event request, and then we had to remember where our events were located in the path for JSON to those. So in this case, they are under data events. Remember where our events were located in the path for JSON to those. So in this case, they are under data events. Now that we've defined where our events are located, we need to define the two primary pieces of information about our events: the message and the severity. So first, let's look at the event message. We can pull up our event info here and assign that. And as we noticed, the example value here has a lot of extra information in there, and we can look at editing that as well by adding a regular expression to it. So here's our sample value that we pulled from the API. And if we don't add any regular expression, this is what we're going to get when we create our events. This isn't really exactly what we want to see in VROps. So we can add something to capture just the parts that we're interested in, which is everything in between the quotes. We can test this regular expression, and then we can see what our example output will look like, and this looks a lot better. Next, we can configure our severity. So here we need to find on our event response the value that represents the severity. So we can set event severity here. And we want to use our API documentation to know the different types of values that could be returned for each of the severities in that API. So, for example, information is one of the values. We can set that to the info level in VROps. And so here we have each type of severity that VROps supports for events. And in addition to that, we have two that are specific to the MP Builder Management Pack and what it can do with them. So for example, you can have the particular severity be logged, but not returned to VROps, or you can have it just discarded if it's not interesting. And we'll need to make a mapping of each of the things available from the API that we want to have in VROps. In this case, it has critical warning and informational. It does not have something we want to use for immediate, and I'm going to get rid of these other two as well. So now all of the events pulled from the system, when they match the term critical, warning, or informational, we'll assign them to these VROps severities. In addition to this, we can say anything that doesn't match these three severities, we can set them to a default behavior. In this case, we could choose anything, but we're going to choose log only so that we have the insight into what things we skipped. We can specify which objects we want this event associated with. Each event will need to be associated with at least one object, and in order to do so, we'll need to create a map between the API events and the objects we've defined in our object section. So we have two object types in there. We have the rubric cluster and the virtual machine. So starting off with the cluster object, we'll need to define which of the properties on the rubric cluster are going to match to this object on the event. So here we can say that the ID field of the rubric cluster should match the object ID field from the event. If that's the case, this event should be matched to it. Additionally, we can do the virtual machine object. Now this is the vCenter adapters virtual machine, and we can choose anything out of VMware Ops today or anything that we were adding on to this. So in this case, we added the ID from rubric, and we can match that to the object ID from the event as well. We can also determine the order of the matches we want to check for. In this case, we'll go more granular, and we'll check for all the virtual machine matches first, and then the cluster ones. And in this case, if it would match to more than one, we'll only have matched to the first object. We also could match to all objects, but in this case, we don't really want to have all those duplicates, so we won't do that. Finally, we can specify what happens if an event is not matched to a virtual machine or a cluster, and by default, we're going to say that we want to relate all of these to the adapter instance that's created when we configure this. If we weren't interested in those, we could toggle this off, and then only the events that match one of these resource types will be returned. Finally, this section is optional. It's useful when your API returns a series of alerts, where everything that's returned is an alert that you want to have in VMware Ops, in which case you can turn this on and specify the type of alert that it really relates to and what it impacts, as well as any kind of wait and cancel cycles you need to set. If it is specific enough that it has a recommendation, that can be set as well. In this case, if we don't turn it on, we can still set those symptoms and alerts in VMware Ops once the management pack is installed. Finally, the last step is to define what type of event this is going to be. And this is a rubric log event.